If you like the idea of an explorer yacht at round about the 80-foot mark, but you're not quite brave enough to embrace the style or the lack of style of the Princess X-Class or the crossover line from the top end of the Aston Doer fleet, well, Ferretti might have something for you. It's a second in the Infynito line, and it's called the Ferretti Infynito 80. Now, one of the first things to notice, other than how keenly this aft end integrates with the sea, is the fact that the outdoor spaces on board this boat are, for the most part, very well sheltered. So the flybridge comes right across to the full beam and covers these side decks, very much in the trawler style. It also comes right towards the back end of that cockpit, right back over the backrest for that aft bench in the cockpit there, for outstanding shelter. And as we move forward, you'll see that continues. These trawler style mouldings here, they pinch in towards the front end of the pilot house there, but then we have an additional moulding that comes out at the front end to cover this bow space. And that is a particularly interesting section of the boat, very unusual. On the face of it, you look at it and think, well, it hems in the view a little bit, but it's charming in its own way, and presumably that's going to enable us to enjoy that space much more readily than you would when you're underway. Starting at the aft end, we have an enormous full beam swim platform, loads of space there, and it's taken advantage of with this big, long transverse bench, big enough I would say for 6 people, nicely angled, nicely put together too, and if I bend down it's relatively practical. We've got a good open space for quick grab gear, seamanship equipment and so on, that you want to hand but not necessarily in view. We have symmetrical steps on both sides to access the cockpit, and beneath those steps we have these little lifting sections so you can just jam your lines under there as well if you like. And stepping up into the cockpit itself, well, as you can see, the flybridge comes a good way aft, provides plenty of shelter down here, and what we have on this particular model is an L-shaped seating area running transverse at the back end, and a very relaxed coffee table down below with some freestanding furniture, access to the flybridge up here on the starboard side, and a compact unit over there that looks like a wet bar, but it's actually just a sink and a little ice maker underneath, just so you can serve people drinks back here in the cockpit. But what we'll do as this busies up is head around the starboard side deck. As you can see, we've got a side gate here, and we've got another side gate on the other side, of course. And down here, this is quite neat. We've got our diesel point, our water point, and our waste point, all in the same hatch, neatly tucked away, cordoned off one from the other to prevent any spillages, because of course in principle putting your waste next to your fresh water isn't that appealing. So that seems relatively practical. As we move forward, you'll see we've got nice cut-out bulwarks just to take the weight out of the profile and to improve views from inside that saloon. And this is quite nice too, just glass inserts in the uprights for these trawler style overhead mouldings. And that, of course, that's not just a moulding for shelter, that is actually the flybridge itself, which runs the full beam aft and just narrows forward at this point. Moving forward, you'll see we've got a pantograph door that comes out on the starboard side, gives you access directly into the galley. But given that there are hordes of people up on the bow checking out this boat's chief party trick, we'll head back aft and head up these external steps to the flybridge. And as I say, even from the outside it's very clear that this flybridge occupies the full beam, so when you head up top you're expecting good things, and that's exactly what you get. At the back end, a huge wraparound sun deck, well beyond the remit of that hardtop further forward. So it really is drenched in sunlight. It's pretty featureless, of course. All we have is some freestanding sun loungers, but you can, of course, orchestrate this deck in whatever way it suits your needs. We do have a couple of units, though, one on either side. It looks like a wet bar, but it isn't. What we have here is a little bit of storage space and an ice maker again. So you can make cocktails up here. And on the other side, a slightly larger unit. Again, it looks like a galley, and that's because it kind of is. A little wet bar at least. We've got the grill there. Under here we've got a really, really good size of sink, very stylishly done. And another ice maker and fridge under there, plus a bit of extra storage. So that's very useful. Let's close all of that back up and head further forward beneath the shelter of that hardtop. And it's worth mentioning that that hardtop is covered in solar panels. The idea there is that you can operate the boat silently overnight, run all your hotel loads with the exception of your air conditioning, so you get a good night's sleep. And actually, if I pop further forward and pop the camera over the wind deflector to look at the shelter above that bow lounge, you'll see that we've got some louvered slats on this particular boat so that you can just adjust the degree of sun or shelter you get in that bow space. But you can, of course, spec that with solar panels as well, just to increase the amount of charge that's being fed into your battery banks. But behind that deep set helm, we have a dining station on the starboard side, big enough for perhaps 8 to 10 people. And opposite that sits quite a relaxed, kind of stylishly contoured lounge seat on the port side. Again, deep set in the shelter of these mouldings. So you really are very well sheltered up on this flybridge. Far better sheltered than you'd expect to be. Let's spin around and head down these central steps. We very quickly find ourselves at that lower helm. And as you can see, it is relatively tight. We've got storage along the port side, a little ledge for things like your binoculars. There's our triple 24-inch plotters, all our switch gear on top, and a single central helm. We're relatively elevated here, so we get decent views above that foredeck. And the struts on this screen are relatively few and far between, so visibility all round is pretty good. But as I say, on a long passage, it could be a slightly solitary pursuit. So this is presumably the place you'll tend to come at night when the family's in bed and asleep anyway. If we head down the steps from here, we very quickly find ourselves on the main deck with the galley forward, the day heads directly ahead of us there. Very decent size, and an uncommonly large window out onto that starboard side deck. And if I face aft, well, it's very clear that one of the chief priorities here with this design is the volume of the saloon. So this bulkhead, which sits at the back end of that slightly raised helm, well, that's a good way forward. And a single level deck extends way aft, right out onto that elevated section of cockpit. It's used here for a cabinet on the port side, really good storage on this boat all round. And what's nice is quite a lot of it doesn't actually look like storage. Kind of decorative bulkheads and so on, and you open them up and are quite surprised by the amount of storage you get. So a dining station forward, freestanding furniture aft as well. It's a T on either side with coffee tables in the centre. And some good storage again here on the starboard side. If we look in there, you'll see it's all very neatly done. Your espresso cups and your cutlery and so on. And a switch panel tucked inside the port one. But if we head further forward right now, out of people's way, you'll see that actually the galley takes a bit of a hit for all that volume back there in the saloon. So this is an 80-foot long-distance boat rated to carry 20 people, and this is your galley. As I say, not huge at all. We get the hob over here, an oven down below, a low-level extractor so you can preserve your views, and a sink and a bit of work surface there, plus a dishwasher under there. There is a little fridge if I spin around just here up top. The work surface really is very much at a premium. There is a seating area here as well, and that's quite useful because the crew quarters doesn't actually have anywhere for the crew to sit. But at the same time, it might be better used if this was eradicated and you had additional work surface across there. So on the face of it, you look at this and you think, well, it's not much of a galley, and in truth, it isn't, particularly in this day and age when people value the galley as kind of the hub of the boat. But this window forward, that drops down out of the way, gives you fantastic ventilation, lovely views out onto this foredeck lounge. And what's particularly brilliant is the fact that you can swap this seating here for a bar that runs the full length transverse here with 3 or 4 stalls there. So actually, if you're choosing to cook for yourself, it's really sociable, really bright, lovely views. lovely ventilation, and actually a far more pleasant experience than you might imagine. Even so, as I say, it's rated to carry 20 people, and if you're using crew, they might get a little bit cross with having to cook in here with relatively meagre facilities and relatively modest space in terms of work surface. But now let's pop out onto that starboard side deck and head round to that bow lounge. As you can see, oh actually look, the window is actually open. I thought it was closed. There we are. This foredeck is quite a space. It's arranged here with a lovely sort of chaise longue style bit of furniture in the forepeak, and if you nestle yourself in there, your head comes just below that fiberglass moulding, so it's super comfortable. Even underway, it's lovely and sheltered. I spin around. This table comes in 3 parts essentially, so you can remove this central part and drop them down as coffee tables, or you can integrate it, lift it up, shunt it aft and use it as a dining station. But as I say, if you're going to have a galley that's compromised to that degree, then you want to minimise that compromise, mitigate that impact of that by having that bar, having those stalls and making a social feature of it. Now let's head back down the port side and back into the boat itself. As we do so, here's the access to the crew cabins down there, and we'll swing round to the left back into the saloon, and we'll head down to the starboard side and check out the accommodation. Now we've got a little spiral staircase, rotates 180 degrees, and as we go down there's a good space there for your washing machine and extra storage. But the basic arrangement of this lower deck involves a forward VIP cabin, a guest double on the port side, a guest twin on the starboard side, and a full beam master cabin aft. But we'll head to the bow cabin first, because this is particularly interesting and not necessarily in a positive way. Now I mentioned how the hull shape is very tapered for a fine ride at that forward end, and then swells higher up the hull. Well, this occupies quite a low section there, so it's right in that deepest V, and you can see this from the arrangement. Now the bed itself is a very decent size, not a lot of floor space to play with, and as you look at the floor space, it raises a little, then it raises again, and then you look for the windows, and there really are none that you can see. It raises again and goes out, again and goes out, because they're tucked right up there. A little port light, one on either side, but because they're so high level and so far outboard, you can't really see them, which means it's not the most pleasant VIP cabin you're ever going to see, and is a bit of a compromise. Arguably though, that soft ride certainly helps make up for that. And storage, as intimated, is really good. So we've got storage under the bed, and here again we have storage sections that don't necessarily look like storage at all. Really good that. Same on the other side, a really cavernous bit of hanging storage. So no problems there. But realistically, if I were the VIP guest, I would take myself and my partner back aft and explore the guest double on the port side instead. Much smaller footprint, as you could see, but a good size of bed, a proper size of window with natural light and some views. Again, you get really good hanging storage. You get that in every single cabin here. And just as the forward cabin has its own ensuite bathroom, well, so does the port guest cabin. So this is what you're looking at. If I step inside, you'll see that headroom is excellent. Again, light is much better. A good size of shower there, big enough for two with a rain shower. And because we have that day heads up top, it's properly private. But let's pop back out into the central corridor, across to the starboard side, and check out the twin cabin. Now, there it is. Again, not a vast footprint, but lots of headroom, huge windows, lots of light, good ventilation, more hanging storage. And if I pop in and look forward, well, the door slightly sticks actually as you open it on the floor. There's some sort of levels issue going on there. But as I look forward, again, really impressive scale of shower. Very nicely done for an ensuite, for a cabin which is ostensibly the least glamorous and the least important of the four. So I'm just going to chase this poor man into the owner's cabin. And as you can see, it is full beam and it's very nicely arranged. There's a 4.5 bed in the centre there. On the starboard side, we've got some nice seating and a dressing table there. The seating is kind of L-shaped, but there's actually no room to sit beneath this high-level storage, so it's kind of compromised in that regard. And we have a mirrored bulkhead here with the TV behind it, which is a nice way to do things. Very attractive furniture. You can apparently either go for a classic or modern fit-out, and I'm kind of guessing, though I don't know, that this is the modern variation. And this is quite a modern feature as well. If I squeeze past this lady here, we've got an open-plan bathroom. So his and her sinks. A nice big shower with a rain shower and seat forward, and if I spin around, there's our toilet section aft. We do have a sliding door here to cordon that off, though it's quite possible I don't know how to operate that. No, I definitely don't. I'll leave that alone. But either way, the fact that it's left open plan does really good things for the way this cabin feels. Lots of headroom, as I say, full beam, so plenty of physical space, but actually accentuates that with the way it's fitted out. Now let's head back up those stairs into the saloon and head aft towards the cockpit, because the only two spaces we've not yet considered are the engine room and the crew cabins. As luck would have it, they've cracked open the hatch here. As you can see, it's bang in the middle of the cockpit. It's relatively compact. It's quite tight getting down in there, but on future models they're going to be increasing the size of that. Once you're down in the engine room itself, though, it's a pretty cavernous space. Certainly big enough to swallow up those uprated MAN V12 1400s, and also big enough to contain that enormous battery bank in its own dedicated box further aft with all the associated systems, so that you can run your hotel loads overnight in blissful silence. Now from there, there's a door on the port side that leads you forward to the crew quarters, and if I head round to the port side deck, you can see that there's a gent coming up there. That's fine, a pretty steep ladder, but access is fine, and there's your point of access to the engine rooms. And once you're down in here, the space is broadly transverse. It's arranged around a single bed on the port side. If we move over to the starboard side, you see we've got a bunk over there, so easy accommodation for three with pretty good storage. There's not space for a dedicated shower, but we do have a wet room and heads here aft, and a little utility space for a washer and dryer there. As I say, relatively tight, and access to the engine room is relatively tight. And there's no social space for the crew to sit, so as I say, it's quite handy that the galley, small though it is, does feature that little two-man seat with the folding out table. Well, as a yacht with serious explorer yacht pretensions, this helm up on the flybridge has to do a pretty serious job, and it absolutely does that. I mean, for a start, you can see the kind of environment I'm in here. I'm very deep set. In stark contrast to most flybridge helm stations, I'm not sitting on top of the thing. I'm not exposed. The mouldings come right up to my kind of elbow level, and if you add the wind deflector, I mean, I'm sheltered right up to the shoulder. And then we've got a pair of 16-inch plotters here on a pretty vertical plinth, which is good in terms of minimising glare, but also that minimises the elements as they approach me here too. So really it is a very sheltered position. We do obviously have a more sheltered lower helm just a couple of steps down, and that's even better featured. So if the weather does turn on a long passage, you can just nip down and use that station instead. Again, in stark contrast to a lot of similar lower helms on boats of this type. Visibility down there is fantastic, so I've got no complaints at all about the setup. But what we want to do, of course, is get her up and underway, because we've got engine options here on this boat. Now you can have a pair of MAN V8 1200s, but on this particular debut model here in Cannes, we've got a pair of MAN V12 1400s. That adds about a ton to the weight, but of course this is a very substantial piece of equipment. It's a 72-ton boat, light, so it doesn't impoverish the performance in any way. If I just spin around and head out to sea a little, get away from the various other boats that are coming out of the show for a play, we'll get her up and underway. And this is an interesting hull shape too. We saw when it was alongside, even though it's quite voluminous forward, it does have a very fine entry, and we see that in the way it approaches a head sea. So I've only got 2, 3, 4 footers at the most here today, heading straight into those pretty much at the top end of 22.5 knots. Well, the ride is very soft, and when you encounter a more substantial swell that lifts up the hull sides, the swelling of that forward hull quarter spreads that water pretty wide. So it's relatively dry. You don't see any water ingress till the very aft ends of those side decks, if at all. As a long distance explorer yacht though, it's not just about protection, it's not just about visibility, it's also about cruising efficiency. And if I ease her back, that's quite telling. Now we have fuel capacity around about 8,000 litres here on this boat, which is very substantial. And if you're happy to just pootle along at 7 knots, we're only drinking a combined total of 3 litres per nautical mile. So we've got a range accommodating 20% redundancy in those tanks, well in excess of 2,000 nautical miles. If we double that to 14 knots, well, the fuel flow increases to 20 litres per mile. So we've got a range around about 320 miles. And if we push right onto the top end, which you rarely do, I would imagine, if you actually own this boat, well, it's about 25 litres per nautical mile. So a range of about 260 to 280 miles. So it's certainly the kind of boat where you can adjust your driving and extend your range, finesse what it is you're trying to do. And all the while, it really is very, very comfortable. Not just soft riding, not just drive, but also up here on this main helm. Tremendously sheltered and comfortable. It's relatively pared back up here in terms of the equipment we have. We've got those 16-inch plotters up here. We've got the twin throttles, the thrusters, a little remote for our MFDs. And on the right hand, we've got a joystick and those Humphrey trim tabs. So it's lovely to see those tabs here on the right hand side. Though in all honesty, you could position those pretty much anywhere, because most people who use them on a boat of this kind are just going to set it on auto and let it do its stuff. So there we have it. This has been a slightly frantic whistle-stop kind of tour of the Infynito 80, but its character, its credentials are very clear. Out on the water, it performs admirably. You could easily use it as a very long-distance, comfortable cruising machine, a proper passage maker. In terms of its internal layout and configuration, well, the galley is small. Some people will be put off by that. The VIP cabin in the bow, that is a little pinched and a little dark, and some people will be put off by that. But in the context of the current 80-foot crossover sector, this is quite a charming boat. It's brilliant to look at for a start, which is by no means something that its competitors can necessarily claim. The flybridge is huge and very, very well sheltered. The saloon is pretty cavernous. The aft end is very attractive, and this bow space, well, this is an absolute delight, particularly as you're able to tailor it to the way you like to go boating. This is, though, a very distinctive and singular design, so whether you love it or hate it, do feel free to comment. If you like what you've seen here, then hit the like button, and if you want to see more videos of this nature, then please do subscribe to Motorboat and Yachting Magazine.